Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe.
Is the United States dollar under threat?
If we hadn't been driving our economy with easy money and then trying to really quickly undo that, we wouldn't be having these problems now.
China just ended the US dollar as we know it. Here's what we know so far. If you are in the know about global finance, you might have heard that China is attempting to ditch the monopoly of the US dollar. The implications of that move might cause shockwaves through the US economy and affect the status of the dollar as a global currency. But is this move really happening? And what exactly are the consequences if China is able to dethrone the dollar's monopoly over global trade? Stay tuned to find out more. But before we proceed further, I would like to request you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. So, a little context before we begin. The US dollar is perhaps the most powerful currency in the world, as it has almost exclusive monopoly as an international currency in global trade. The hegemony of the US dollar, which has been there for the last 80 years, can be attributed to the fact that it is a reserve currency. A reserve currency is a fancy word for an international currency, and basically means that the US dollar has been accepted as a currency since the end of World War II because of its stability and resilience. When the system of reserve currency was first used, it was used to maintain the price of commodities and exchange rates because the dollar was inextricably linked to the gold standard. This means that all global trade could now be gauged in terms of dollars, which would have a reliable and predictable value. Reliability is a big thing when using a reserve currency, as it means that you can end up exchanging for commodities with a currency that is not recognized by another country. So, the US dollar kind of acts like a safety valve for most countries to keep their economies intact. But the US also directly benefits from this, since the more countries shore up dollars in their reserves, the more value the US dollar will have. However, now the US dollar is in danger of losing its prestigious title of reserve currency. Such is the history of the global economic order. For instance, before 1945, the British sterling pound was the reserve currency, which lasted for more than 105 years. Before that, the Netherlands had its currency as a reserve currency, and Spain before that. You get the idea. The reserve currency status is never permanent and typically changes hands every 100 years or so. Another important thing about this transition is that such transitions are not instantaneous. No. The transition from one reserve currency to the next takes about 10 to 20 years. The shift from one reserve currency to another is accomplished by three factors. The rise of the new reserve currency is due to a period of peace and prosperity. This is the time when people have unimpeachable trust in the system, so there is a lot of betting and borrowing, and the system registers healthy growth. In this stage, we typically see great indicators for education, innovative thinking, honesty, and hard work. But all of these indicators need a system that recognizes their raw potential and brings it to fruition. This is normally done through loans and allowing people to make investments that will enable them to enjoy a good life in the future. This trend continues until the reserve currency reaches the peak of its value. But from that point on, the reserve currency can only go down. This happens when people simply lose trust in the system. The general trend at this stage is to just sell whatever is left of that currency instead of reinvesting it. This mostly happens when an economy is about to go bankrupt. Bankruptcy implies that a country is not able to pay back its debt, or at least its interest. In this case, the country will have to resort to defaulting and printing more money, which devalues the currency. With devaluation, we see a marked increase in inflation. That's because with the depreciation in currency, we have to pay more for buying commodities. This results in an increase in inflation as well. An important point on inflation, the Reserve has already intervened 3 times to keep the US's market economy afloat. Once when dot-com bubble burst, the second during the mortgage crisis of 2008, and the third time during the pandemic. In times of economic uncertainty such as these, the rich and the elite move their currencies to places where their profits are secure. This means they can give away their currency to other nations if their interests are protected. But really, what has triggered the downfall of the dollar in the global economy? There are 3 factors at play. The first is the exchange rate with other currencies. The second is the demand for long-term treasury notes, and the third is the dollar reserves held by other countries. The first 2 indicators are quite optimistic. However, the third indicator is looking less optimistic. The foreign currency reserves of other countries are being taken over by other currencies. This is the lowest amount of the US dollar, in terms of reserves held by other countries, that we have seen in the past 25 years. One outcome of that has been that China and Brazil have struck an agreement to deal straight with their own currencies, removing the US as a reserve currency. It needs to be noted that this did not happen overnight. In fact, this has been happening gradually since 2010, when China began moving away from the US dollar. Russia and China stopped using the US dollar a year ago. India has warmed up to the idea of using the yuan as a reserve currency, and Saudi Arabia is also moving away from the US dollar. So what are the immediate implications of this move away from the US dollar? One thing we see is that China's foothold in international trade has become stronger with the expansion of trading volume. The real question is, what lies ahead for the US dollar? The answer is that we cannot say anything for sure. Now, I know this is not very reassuring. But one thing is for sure, in the short term, there is no currency that can overtake the US dollar. To completely wipe out the USD's dominance, an anomalous and unpredictable event has to take place. Again, this bears repeating. Even though it's unlikely, that doesn't mean it won't happen. Many reports have agreed that the US stimulus following the pandemic triggered a currency war across the globe. Different countries began boosting their own currencies. We saw Saudi Arabia enter a new trade agreement. So, the prognosis is that the USD is here to stay for the short term, but nothing definitive can be said about the long run. That brings our video to a conclusion. Don't forget to leave a like. Thanks for watching until the end. See you in the next one. Cheers!